Hello and welcome to episode 17 of Rubbish Talk with myself, Alistair Meldrum.
And myself, Jane Bond.
And today we're excited to tell you we have a young lady called Laura Young, who I've probably seen in the TV more recently than I've seen any other contacts I've got. And Laura is an environmental campaigner, and one of her big campaigns at the moment is disposable vapes. So I know we've talked lots about disposable vapes, so we're going to have a whole hour about disposable vapes for everybody. But it was really interesting talking to Laura, and we'll get on to that later on. But first, as usual, a little bit of a roundup of news items we've spotted recently. One of the ones I spotted was there was a bit of, I think, probably criticism of the Scottish Government about their plan for the sustainable air fuel. So this is fuel for aircrafts that's made from residual waste. And myself and Jane were talking about this earlier, and we actually don't understand the process that makes that. So if there is anybody out there that understands it, and I think we do actually, I think a gentleman called Simon Glenn maybe knows how this is done. It'd be really good to get a wee bit of information about how it's actually physically possible. I know I am aware of some of the aircraft companies using cooking oil, making a fuel from cooking oil that they're currently using, but I'd love to know how it's done with residual waste. But I think the going back to the Scottish Government criticism was really so Scotland's made a commitment to try and use sustainable air fuel, but it's really the amount of residual waste that's required to make the amount of fuel that's required in Scotland, and the two things are a bit out of sync. There's probably not sufficient amount of residual waste out there to make it happen. So as always with all these things, we'll put a couple of links up on the show notes if anybody is interested, or if anybody knows more than we do, then quite happy to learn all about it. And going from flying planes to much more environmentally friendly, Jane.
Yeah, well, I wanted to talk about the cycling event in Glasgow. The UCI people must have seen or the World Champion Cycling event. If not, seen it being subjected to all road closures or whatever. But I don't know. I think it just showed Glasgow in such a brilliant light.
Not just Glasgow. Remember, we had Fort William, we had down in the Borders, and all over the country.
Absolutely. Well, do you know, I was at a cycling event on Saturday morning, and we went out cycling in the rain with some of the crew from Specialised who do the bikes, and one of the girls was from Stirling, and she said it's just amazing. They were cycling all along her local routes, and she said that just looked, and the sun was shining. And all the pictures look really good. But back to waste. I was at the BMX finals on Sunday, and I tell you, it's absolutely amazing. Never seen anything like it in my life. But what I found was, apart from the fact that everybody's friendly, people have come from all over the place, is that I think there was no waste drops. There was no, that people were using the bins. Even looking around Glasgow, everything seemed to be clean and tidy. The council must have done a really good job to clean everything up. And there was something I think that caught our eye a little bit, wasn't there, Alistair, about the fact that they were being given, all the volunteers had a nice little pack. So they were all wearing their nice little blue outfits with Lidl on the side. There are other shops, but obviously that was supporting the race thing. But what they were banned from using their aluminium bottles as part of their welcome pack, so they wouldn't refill these aluminium bottles. Not entirely sure why. It says something about a security risk, or whether it was like, people, instead of gluing themselves to the floor, were going to throw these aluminium bottles in front of the cyclists. I've no idea. But anyway, they were allowed to use plastic bottles. But yeah, that was quite.
It seems a shame they've gone to the effort of giving a volunteer a reusable, refillable bottle, and then for security reasons they weren't allowed to use the damn things. Which, fascinating. I came through Glasgow again at the weekend there, and the women's cycling race on, and it was really good atmosphere, and it's quite an interesting concept that the Cycling Association have pulled all these different events into the one event. I think it's quite a sort of exciting sort of format. And I think if anything, the one thing I would say is it seemed to arrive without much publicity. So I think over the last couple of weeks, people have suddenly realised there's a big event on in Scotland, but up to then, it was like nobody really knew about it, which in a way seems a bit of a shame, but never mind. Yeah. Anyway, the next one I spotted was an article about Airbnb for your garden. So this was to do, so somebody set up if you like, a matching service. So if you live in a tenement, for example, and you would like a garden, or vice versa, you've got a garden that you don't use, that you would like somebody to use it, and then you can sort of share out your garden space. I just quite liked the concept. It was an Airbnb for your garden, and again, as always, we'll share the link up in the website if anybody's interested.
Do you think that could be like a cost-effective way of getting your garden sorted, do you think?
Well, that did cross my mind.
Somebody to come and mow my lawn, do you think?
My garden probably doesn't get quite the amount of attention it should, so I should maybe test out the theory.
Yeah, I'll rent out my garden as long as you'll mow the lawn.
Yeah. You've just sort of seed in my head. I'm gonna register. I'm gonna register, see what happens.
Yeah, and the final one, we've got Conway County Borough Council to fine households who don't recycle. So this is quite interesting because what they're saying, we've given them all this support. We're going to go into people's homes, show them how to sort their rubbish, and then if they still don't do it, they're going to issue them with a fixed penalty note of £100. So I think that might be quite interesting to see how they monitor that, how many people are going to pay it. So yeah, we'll keep an eye on that one.
It will be an interesting one, won't it? It's this, the usual Daily Mail headlines will be public giving a hard time, but the reality is the public should be recycling. They should be doing it to the best of ability, and there's lots of people out there that don't bother, so why should they pull down the rest of the community? So yeah. It'll be interesting to see how they go on. That is us for news for the week, actually, of the fortnight. The only other thing is a wee update on our podcast listeners. We have a big increase in 23 to 27-year-olds, and we also have a big increase in 35 to 44-year-olds. Well done to the younger generation for getting involved and engaged. So if you are listening and you're in these age groups, please share, as you hopefully are, with your friends and your pals. So with nothing else from ourselves, we're going to pass over to a really interesting chat with Laura Young, who is very young, but she's packed a lot into her short career already, and she's very committed and well spoken about the campaign she's got on the go about disposable vapes, and we will also put the link to her campaign about banning or calling for a ban for disposable vapes. So that's it from us. Over to Laura Young.
Hi Laura, nice to meet you again. We're going to ask you a number of questions, but most of it is all about you really, and how you've got to where you've got to and what you've done and what are your sort of concerns, and we know you're an environmental campaigner, so it'd be good to hear your campaigns, what you're passionate about. So initially, can you tell us something about what you do and your background that you've been doing to get to where you are at the moment, and a bit about your role would be fantastic.
Yeah, it's great to be on. Thank you so much. Very excited to be on the podcast. I guess I spend my time doing two things primarily. The first thing is my sort of day job, which is I'm a PhD researcher based up in Dundee, if anyone listening is from Dundee. And there's two universities here, the University of Abertay and the University of Dundee, and I'm supervised with both. And that's looking at how we involve communities when we are changing the places and spaces we live to make us more climate resilient, looking at things like nature-based solutions and blue-green infrastructure. And so I've been doing that for the past almost year. And alongside that, I'm a campaigner. I'm an environmental campaigner. So back in 2018, I started talking about environmental issues online. I've got a background in environmental science and geography, and I decided to start speaking about stuff. You know, I think everybody watched Blue Planet and thought, eek, let's all try and play our part to make a difference. And so I started on a bit of a journey looking at, you know, what can we do as individuals? But over time, that has sort of developed into large platforms online where I talk about everything from plastic and waste. So, you know, here in Scotland, that's recently been talking about deposit return schemes or bans on single-use plastics or whatever might be in the news, all the way through to lots of different issues around climate change. And so I kind of campaign at different times on different important issues. But the big one that I am working on just now is all around the issue of disposable vapes. So that's these throwaway electronics that have flooded into our shops and into our markets. And I'm doing campaigning around getting those banned, hopefully, not just here in Scotland, hopefully it'll be across the UK. And I've been working on that since October 2022. So still not a year from the day that we're recording this, but there's been loads of progress since then.
That's quite interesting. We've had two things, because we had Charlie Devine on the last time, and he's from Dundee, at the Energy from Waste in Dundee, and he was saying how Dundee has changed so much, and you know, in terms of the climate change stuff that you're doing, that's quite links into that quite well and quite nicely. And then we had Scott Butler a few weeks, or about a month ago or whatever, talking about vapes as well. So it kind of, you know, it all links in, doesn't it, Alistair? We're all kind of like, you know, you would think this was planned.
We have mentioned vapes a few times in this podcast, Laura, as I'm sure you know. One of the interesting things, one of the next question we normally ask is what brought you into the world of waste management. But I think, if I'm being honest, you've probably got an honorary position in waste management, because you do have a normal day job. And I think, particularly a couple of weeks ago, you could hardly turn on national news without seeing you pop up to talk about vapes. So it's really interesting in terms of what you've actually managed to do in, you know, a pretty short space of time. But I think I could imagine it's quite frustrating as well that, you know, you can see this big huge issue, but there doesn't seem to be a huge amount of action going on at the moment.
Yeah, and I mean, I see, it's funny because a lot of people ask me, you know, do you work in the waste industry? Because I exist online as Less Waste Laura. That's how I started, very much as a sort of individual trying to reduce my waste. And, you know, people often ask me, and, you know, I don't work at a recycling facility, I don't work for a waste management company, but I've got all of this extensive knowledge about the waste industry. But I think the one perspective I think I bring, which is quite valuable, if I can be humble for a moment, is actually that I am just a regular person. And so when a lot of things, whether it's the deposit return scheme or complex, you know, electrical recycling systems or whatever it might be, when waste experts talk about it, they sometimes forget that actually the general public has no idea what they're on about and is just trying to do the right thing, and they're just at home looking at their selection of bins going, okay, but where do I put this, what do I do? And so I think sometimes I'm just trying to be that voice of, you know, but how does this work in reality? You know, it's great to have the theories of waste management, but let's always remember, like, the person who ultimately is going to be holding this product at the end of its life cycle, and where do they put it? But, you know, it's hard. So, you know, the campaign around disposable vapes, it came about actually because I was finding them as litter. Like, that's how it all started. And, you know, to finding them as litter in October 2022 to now, we've obviously discovered a whole host of things that's wrong with them. It's not just that they get littered occasionally, it's the waste of the precious resources, it's the fire risk, it's the complications in recycling, it's all of that stuff. But the thing that's really shocked me is, oh my goodness, getting any change is so slow. You know, you can't just go to your MP or go to your councillor about an issue and it gets solved in a week or a couple of weeks, especially when you're trying to do something of this scale. You know, actually, you need consultations, you need reports, you need time for everyone to wrap their heads around it. And I think that can sometimes be quite frustrating when, you know, as soon as people know about the problem, they go, oh, absolutely, I'm on board. This is a disaster. Let's do something. But it's about the time that it takes to bring people along. And, you know, right now we're sort of sitting in this, I feel it's a bit of limbo. you know, both the Scottish government and the UK government have got loads of information in their hands. They've got reports, they've had calls for evidence on the environmental and the sort of younger youth vaping side, which is a whole other public health issue. But we're sort of in this limbo where we're sort of waiting for some sort of decision to be made, and it can feel quite powerless because, you know, none of that is in my hands or in the campaigns of, you know, a lot of us who work in this industry even. And so yeah, it can feel quite frustrating at times when it feels like such a simple issue.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's like turning a massive tanker, isn't it? You kind of hope that at some point it is actually going to turn slightly, that we will. It's like you say, you kind of think, yeah, it's simple, stop it, you know. But then there's so much discussion.
It's easier said than done, though, isn't it? I think the one thing that surprises me about it all is how it's grown to such a massive, you know, millions and millions of these things in the marketplace. And the sort of public agencies that should be sort of looking ahead at the big issues didn't seem to be that aware that this was, you know, slightly more important than banning plastic cotton buds or plastic spoons. You know, the impact, the environmental impact of them is so huge. I was interested what you were saying there, Laura, about, you know, communicating with the wider public. I think a lot of the reason for this podcast was just to try and do that, because I've often been frustrated that the waste sector is good at talking to the waste sector, and we talk to people that understand it, and we're not very good at communicating, you know, what the issues are, you know, why you shouldn't be putting a battery in your bin, why you should be recycling your electricals, why you should be doing all these things, and why that's so important. So I was going to ask you if you meant to end up in the waste industry, but I think you probably answered that one.
I know. I mean, no. I mean, I don't think I ever, you know, saw myself really stepping into this. But ultimately, I think it's something, you know, everyone's passionate about seeing, you know, cleaner streets. Nobody likes litter. Nobody wants to feel that. Also, nobody just likes taking their bin out. So I think anytime people hear, oh, I want to reduce my waste, you know, that can be a positive thing. But I think it's just one of these spaces I feel quite passionate about. You know, it's something I'm really interested in. But I think it's because it also crosses with a lot of other spaces. You know, often when people think about waste or recycling, they think of like a physical item that's either going to go to landfill or go to a incineration, energy from waste, you know, sort of plant, and then we forget about it. But we forget that actually behind a lot of our waste is also, you know, emissions, production, manufacturing. It links with climate change. And so I think the reason I also like talking about waste is because I like to, you know, bring together the fact that our waste is representative of what we buy, it's representative of our consumption's related to climate. You know, I think I like to remind people that all of this is actually pulled together. And I love talking about the other end of it as well, which is, you know, when we're talking about reducing waste, we're not just talking about buy these items instead of these and you'll reduce your waste. It's also talking about how can we get that circular economy? How can we support small businesses that are doing repair shops or, you know, kind of tailoring and seamstress, and like how can we, you know, also kind of fuel this economy that's a lot more sustainable that comes from waste. And I think I love having those conversations together so that people can connect those dots and realize that it's important to think about it. But no, I don't think it was ever an industry that I thought I would be stepping my toe into or doing so much, you know, campaigning around.
Yeah. It's quite, because it kind of does link in then with all your PhD work as well, doesn't it? Because that, you know, the climate change and one of the things you kind of said there was the blue-green infrastructure. Is there something you can explain that? Because that's one thing that I've heard and I kind of know a little bit about, but, you know, it'd be quite interesting to hear your sort of take on what that actually means.
Yeah, so I mean, especially when you think about urban settings, so any sort of reasonable sized village or town or, you know, city centre, when you look around, the majority of what you're looking at is grey. So it's, you know, buildings, it's homes, it's great infrastructure. And what we know is that when we take land, so whether it's a forest or just a patch of grass, and we build on it, we're changing the surface of that area. And that's going to change the way that it works. And so, you know, if you were to have a massive rain shower on a forest, that would have a bigger, that would have a lot of different impacts if you have a big rain shower over a concrete pavement or a car park. So what we've been noticing for the past, decades really, is that while we've been changing the places that we live, we've been seeing impacts like localized flooding. We've obviously been needing to create drainage systems. We've maybe even in some city centres been having something called like an urban heat effect, where it's really, really hot in the city centre because it's just full of concrete. So we know that we need to be working better with nature when we're creating our urban spaces. That's both new ones and the ones that already exist. So blue-green infrastructure is, in my head, I think about it as the opposite of grey. So if you look at a concrete building, it's not just in Aberdeen. If you look at any building, it's grey infrastructure. But if you look at urban, parks, green spaces, water features, it can be a river, a loch, or it can be a sort of kind of created man-made water space. These can offer really good benefits. They can help with localized flooding, they can help cool down, provide more shade. Also, it's good for things like biodiversity. And it helps us become more resilient. So, in Scotland, we're seeing a lot more flooding, we're seeing warmer periods. So we need to be creating places that we live that can be more resilient to climate change. But the important thing is, we're never going to be climate resilient unless communities are resilient as well. And so we need to make sure that communities are part of the conversation when doing this. We need communities to understand, the risks of where they live. They might live somewhere that's flood prone, or they might live somewhere that is going to be getting a lot of heat, or they might be getting somewhere that's going to have drought. And we want communities to understand the changes that they can make. But also, if we are going to radically change some of the places that we live, put in new parks, put in new cycle paths, whatever it might be, we need to make sure the communities know how to get their voices heard in that consultation. Traditionally, consultations go out and it might get a handful of people, and that's not really a community consultation. So how can we do that a lot better so that we don't put in some infrastructure that could have been, it might be pretty rubbish and it could have been amazing if we just got the voices in. And I mean, I think that relates to a lot of the work that I do. It's about, anything that we're trying to do, whether it's changing green spaces in urban places, or, putting in blue-green infrastructure, these nature-based solutions, or whether it's changes to curbside recycling. No matter what it is, if you don't bring people along with you, it's going to create confusion, and it's going to create things that might just end up being unsuccessful, because if people don't understand it, it's going to go wrong, it's going to go a bit wonky, and then it'll be a bit of a failure. And so I think I'm really passionate about making sure that everyday people understand, how to live in a way that is a bit more sustainable, but also be a part of all the changes that we're doing. And I think that kind of ties in a lot to the campaigning work that I do.
I think a lot of people think they can't influence things or can't help things. I think a lot of people feel a bit lack of power, that what if they do an improvement, that won't make a big difference. But I think the reality is, if everybody did a little bit, everybody cycled a bit or walked a bit instead of driving, all these things it certainly add up. It was interesting you mentioned sort of drainage schemes. I was walking through I've been off for a week or so, and I walked around the golf course yesterday. I quite often do, and there's big signs up like construction barriers. I wonder what this is. And I sort of walked to the top of the hill and looked over the fence, and they've built looks like a big settlement pond thing and some drainage work, and it'd be really nice actually. There was previously to the river there. And another thing I was going to mention, I was walking into work this morning along Ayr Beach, and there must have been, I don't know how many South Ayrshire Council employees clearing up all the verges. We get quite a lot of sand gets blown up onto the beach, onto the pavements and stuff, so quite often there's weeds growing along, so they're clearing it all up. And I was thinking, what on earth are they doing? I've not seen that concerted an effort to clean up before. But then I remembered we've got the Ayr show is coming to Ayr at the beginning of September, so I think this was the corporate cleanup, so that Ayr is sparkling for all the visitors. So but it just shows you, what got me was the amount of, there's probably, 10 staff, a few tractors, diggers. It's a pretty big operation, a pretty big cost, and that's part of that is because we're not sort of spending. Going back to, we had George Niblock on the podcast previous about litter management and street cleansing and how important it is to just, it's one of these jobs that if you keep on top of it, it's less of a big job, whereas in this case South Ayrshire's probably not kept on top of it, and they're having to do a pretty big operation to get it cleaned up. So yeah, great. So you're you're pretty young, Laura, and you've only been a few years in the working world and stuff. Any favourite roles or projects you've done, or are you finding everything interesting at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I find everything really interesting. One of the kind of first jobs that I did out of uni was working for Tearfund, which is like an international organisation, and they do a lot around poverty alleviation. But one of the big things they were doing was campaigning around plastics, and talking about the fact that globally plastic has a huge impact on people. And so we're really lucky here that you can chuck your waste outside your door into the bin and it'll get collected, and suddenly it's not your problem anymore.
The magic bin fairy, I call it.
Exactly, the bin fairies are amazing, but globally that's not what's happening. So I found it really interesting to kind of do campaigning actually as part of that around the big plastic producers, looking at globally who makes the most plastic, some of the big organizations, the Coca-Colas and the Unilevers of the world, and kind of looking at what they're doing overseas. It was really interesting. But I think also as part of that role, I got to go to COP26 in Glasgow, and I think for me personally, being from Glasgow meant a lot, because I was living in Glasgow at the time, and that's where I'm from, it's where I grew up. So it was amazing to see the world sort of landing on my doorstep to be talking about something I'm really passionate about. But it was also a really insightful thing. It was basically every country in the world represented to discuss climate change at this huge summit in a place that I've, as a kid went to concerts in. And so, it was really interesting. But I think it was also good to get that perspective, because I am a really big believer that locally is where we're going to get a lot of our solutions and a lot of our actions from. But it's also important to sort of see globally what's the influence and what are the policies and the practices that need to come out of these big summits, and what impact does that have. And so I think being at COP26, being one of the observers and doing a lot of work around that was amazing. And it also meant that in the run up to it and after, we had a lot of ammunition for Scottish-based projects to say, look, either this thing is coming or this thing has just been, we need to get our act together. We need to be looking at, the businesses that operate in Scotland. We need to be looking at local, solutions. And it gave us a lot of fuel to really kind of push that forward, which was great.
Yeah, it was quite an amazing thing, wasn't it, with everybody coming together. And you just hope that it's not just a big talking shop and that things actually come out of it. But that means being cynical, Laura, I think. So we kind of talked about your current role, the campaigning for the vapes and your PhD. And I guess what is the ultimate aim? What are you trying to achieve eventually? I mean, what's the end point for you? What do you feel is the end point, or is there no end point? You just kind of keep going, because you finish one thing and there's on to the next.
I think that's true. And for me, the vape stuff's really interesting, because up until when disposable vapes took over, I was always kind of championing, discussing different issues for how we can be better with waste and recycling. But when vapes came along, I think the reason it took off is because nobody was talking about it. There was no organizations talking about disposable vapes or the waste. There was really no research. There was kind of nothing happening. So I think the reason it's taken such a big chunk of my time is because me, alongside all the other kind of groups that came together, we were the first to kind of put it on the table and say what's happening. But I think for me, the reason I say there's sort of no end point is because, number one, I think the vaping industry is going to be really clever and is going to kind of get their way probably around any regulations that come in place. I think we'll always be trying to chase them to make them a sustainable industry. But I also think that up until now, rightly so, the conversation has all been around disposable vapes. And that's because disposable vapes are this new disposable throwaway electronic device that's just kind of come out of nowhere. And if I was to ask you to name even 5 other throwaway electronic devices, I think we would all really struggle, because most of the electronics that we use, our phones, our laptops, our toasters, our kettles, they last years. These are not things that you throw away. So I think what I'm thinking about is, okay, but what's next? what is the next disposable electronic that's going to come onto the scene? And how can we, through disposable vapes, put in some really good regulations to make sure that we don't just have the same problem? Like even, you know, because I've been trying to think this, I'm trying to think all the time, like, what is the next disposable electronic? I don't think any of us could have seen vapes coming in this form. And so, you know, I did the Edinburgh Half Marathon, and I thought maybe it's disposable running trackers that people wear for one race and then throw away. I also saw a picture a couple of weeks ago on Twitter, and it was like, you know, you get these rechargeable power banks that you know, plug in, you take it about, but actually it was one that you buy in a little packet from, you know, a convenience shop, and it's basically got one charge in it and then you throw it away. And I thought, actually, disposable electronics are coming. They're sort of slowly entering into, you know, our regular habits. And so I hope that there will one day be a very clear-cut decision made on disposable vapes, and that, I guess, would be maybe an end point to that campaign or that kind of conversation. But I do also think that there is always going to be, especially when, let's be honest, companies want profit, and what's profitable? Disposability and throwaway culture, because it means people buy things again and again and again. I do think that we're constantly going to be chasing after companies that are creating stuff that is really unsustainable. And so I think that's what I'm hoping to do, though, is slowly shift the conversation from, you know, disposable vapes specifically to let's actually have a conversation about disposable electronics. Because even though we do have electronic recycling, so recycling in the UK, it's not set up for disposable electronics. That's not what it was designed for. That's not what it was set up for. And that's also a really inappropriate use of recycling. And so I think that's why I have a feeling there might not be an end date to this, but it will hopefully open up a conversation, a wider one.
Sorry, Jane. The one I see, Laura, coming as a huge issue is, you know, we're spending, there's companies out there spending massive amount of money looking at more efficient batteries, better batteries, and everything you've got is a battery, a rechargeable this, a rechargeable that. The actual infrastructure for recycling and recovering, proper recovery of batteries is woeful, and that's not just in the UK, that's worldwide. So you're looking at, you know, there's companies in the UK and they have to export batteries to Japan to get them recycled, and that's just, you know, it's, you know, so we spend a vast amount of money developing the products, you know, the Tesla cars and the fancy batteries, but no money at all in actually putting an infrastructure in place for all these batteries that are going to come onto the market. So it's a huge issue.
I think we're also seeing a trend of people making smart homes. You know, everything. Like, I went to someone's house and they had salt and pepper shakers that you pushed a button and it ground it for you, and it was like it had batteries in it. And I thought, if there's anything that we don't need, it's batteries inside salt and pepper grinders. But actually, I think there is this techie home, smart home solution. You can turn on everything from your phone and everything's got a battery or everything's plugged in. And I think that's really unnecessary, you know, if I'm honest. But I think that is exactly what you're speaking to. You know, we're creating these products that are shiny and new, and we don't really think about either when the trend's over and you're going to chuck it away or donate it, what actually happens to it. But, you know, also just what is the impact, you know, of continually having things that are, you know, using power and using electricity in the batteries. And yeah, I mean, I think that's, you know, we've had like rechargeable batteries, but they're so expensive. And so, yeah, people do just like use stuff without really thinking about where it came from, or unfortunately where it's going to end up and what happens to that.
I can't believe there's salt and pepper things that you just press a button. How lazy is that?
I know.
that exercise of like grinding the pepper, you know, I'm sure there must be a little bit of exercise in that. In that kind of, okay. Anyway, so in terms of, if I had one of those, it would totally go wrong within about 5 minutes. Anything that I pick up that's kind of electronic, it just seems to anyway, never mind. In terms of your sort of, you obviously with all your campaigning and all that sort of stuff and your focus on the environment, it obviously it changes your work, your home life as well. And I guess you've got, I'm just imagining all your recycling bins and stuff, and what about your friends? I mean, are they all campaigners like yourself, or are you going in there going, right, what have you got? Let me see if I can make you more sustainable. What's your sort of thing in the home place?
Oh, I mean, it's funny because this happens really, really often. I'll go over to like friends or family, and before I come in, they go, just before you come in, I've just got to say it, and they'll start spilling out some sort
Confessing.
of like, yeah, confess. Just when you come in, you're gonna see this and you're gonna see this, and like I ran out of time, and I'm always like, what's the view? And someone once said to me, you should do a sort of, remember Kim and Aggie, and they used to go to people's houses and just berate them for living in filth. They were like, you should do that, but with plastic. I mean, I hope I don't actually do that, but it's interesting because especially when I moved to Edinburgh to do my masters, it was the sort of first time I'd moved after kind of becoming an environmental campaigner. So the people I'd been living with had lived with me for years when I was doing my undergrad, and when I moved to Edinburgh, I moved in with like a new friend, and I thought, she doesn't really know much about me. We only kind of met through mutual friends, and I thought, I also don't think she knows that I'm like really passionate about this stuff, but I don't want to, come off too strong. And so, we both sort of moved in, and it was one of those, you would go into the bathroom and there would be a plastic toothbrush and a bamboo toothbrush, or you would, go and I would be buying these kind of, reusable or eco-friendly things, and it would be alongside the things that she'd bought. And it was funny because over time, I sort of noticed her habits slowly changing, just because she was maybe seeing or learning about the new products, but not in a way that I said, I want to sit you down and tell you all the things that you need to stop buying and you need to do this. But actually, it was kind of over time. And I think partly that's about it. It's, you don't know what you don't know. And so until someone talks to you about, various different things, and, so sometimes my friends will come to me and say, hey, I've got a question. Do you use shampoo bars? Would you recommend any? Or it might be someone saying, do you know what bin I put this in? And, I can have a conversation about it. And sometimes it's bigger things, like, one of the things I'm quite passionate about is reusable period products, and the amount of not just waste we can save, but money you can save. And when I was at uni, I played sports, and our whole sports team decided that we were all going to go on a journey to try and, find something that worked for us. But I think a lot of it is about education, and I think that's what I've realised is, people just don't know, and also, get a bit confused. And so, like, my boyfriend's family are the kind of perfect example that when I sort of came on the scene, I would slowly start seeing sustainable things existing in the house that they were obviously trying to show off. But, one of the things that they said was they didn't have a bin in their house. They had like a plastic bag on the back of a door handle. And so I'd be walking about going, where do I put my tea bag? Where do I put this? Where do I put that? And they'd just be like, oh, just chuck it in the bag. And I was like, oh, I really don't want to have a rant about recycling, but what's happening? But actually, it was just because and they're very smart people. They were just like, we just don't know. It's just confusing. And so slowly, I was saying to them, well, this is a few things, a few ways you can work out where to put it. My boyfriend's original phrase was, I mean, it looks recycly, so does it just go in recycling? I said, looks recycly. Okay, right, we'll work on that. But slowly, and even just little things like they didn't have a food waste bin, and it's because the council had just accidentally missed them out when they were doing the big delivery of them years ago. And I sort of said, well, let's sign you up for one online, it'll get delivered. And was talking about the importance of separating food waste, and not just that it's important for climate, but it's important because it means your bin doesn't smell, and it means you don't need to put all these kind of benefits as well. And so I think often it is about having those conversations, and it's nice now to go to people's homes and see the changes that they've made, but often it's just because they didn't know or they weren't sure. And I completely understand, because I think a bugbear of mine is compostables. I don't know if you've spoken about compostables on the podcast, or if you have personal views on them.
We've not hugely, Laura. So go on and explain. Because I do know what you're going to say, but the listeners would probably like to hear this.
Yeah, I mean, my main problem with compostables is it's still single use. So we're still making stuff to use it once. Like if a compostable coffee cup, we're still making it out of all these materials to have one coffee out of it and throw it away. And also, if people are taking a coffee away and then leaving your shop, they're just going to chuck it into a regular bin. So it's not going to break down in the way that it was designed to. And so in my head, though, it's just as bad as plastic, when you can take your own cup or hopefully sit in and get a China one. But I think, you know, to me, it's really easy because I'm just saying, well, just take your own, just avoid it completely. But for people who aren't in this industry or aren't kind of connected, they have been sold this, well, it's kind of greenwashing, but, you know, they've been sold this is much more sustainable, this is better. And so actually, when I've been speaking to, like, I speak to my cafe manager at the university, one of the universities that I go to, and he sort of said, are you joking? I've just bought thousands of units of these because I thought they were better. And you're now kind of talking about, you know, all these issues. And I said, and that's part of the issue is, you know, we are, especially when companies, you know, kind of come on the scene and are wanting to sell a product. And so I think I also understand people's frustrations because he sort of said, well, I may as well just get the plastic ones then. I thought, see, this is what happens though, even with regular people, they think, I don't know where this goes, so I may as well just chuck it in the bin. Or my boyfriend's dad went, does it not all just go to China anyway? And I was like, well, I mean, that is the reality though. You know, that's what people are hearing on the news. And ultimately, that's what we're up against. And so I think if we don't get it right and don't communicate it well, we do end up with just everyday people being either confused or, oh, it's not worth it anyway, because I read a news article that said it, you know, it doesn't even stay here. And I think that's important for us to understand that. But yeah, certainly I do get some people sort of, as soon as I walk through their door, confessing to all the plastic that they have in the cupboards, that I think they think I'm going to raid them. But hopefully it's mostly because they're wanting to make changes. They just often have questions.
I would agree. I think it is all about education, isn't it? You know, because a lot of people just, like you say, just don't know. They don't know what the best thing to do is or what bin to put or whatever. I mean, I always go down to round to my mum when I go to my mum's, you know, she's got all her recycling and all this sort of stuff and her food waste and everything that's there. And then she'll say to me, do you think I can put this in here? And I'm saying, well, have you had a look at what it says in the in your council thing about what they take? Oh, it'll be fine if I put it in there. I can always take it out again. And I'm thinking, right.
Wish cycling, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Wish cycling.
Yeah.
But it's hard, you know, the number of times we've had products and seen things that we're thinking, where on earth does this go? We don't know, and we're in the sector. And I think the last podcast we talked about, you know, all the different products supermarkets are putting on out there, you know, cardboard tubs that are lined with plastic and they're claiming they're recyclable. And the reality is there's not a processing plant in the UK pulling these things out to recycle them. Yep. You know, so they might theoretically be possible to recycle, but the reality is they're not getting recycled.
Yeah, and even, you know, the back of the packets of things, you know, it's so confusing. You've got the little circle with the arrows that looks like it can be recycled, but actually that means there's money going to recycling, but don't recycle it, or it says check local recycling, and do people know how to do that? So yeah, it's not easy, and I mean that certainly is one of the bugbears with the vapes. Like, to go back to that, is recently there was some photos that sort of did a big circulation on Twitter and LinkedIn online. And it was because one of the major brands of disposable vapes have now done this campaign. And the campaign is basically, you know, recycle your vape with absolutely no extra information. Where do you recycle it? Do you recycle it at home? Do you recycle it with plastic bottles? Do you recycle it? Where do you recycle it? Where's the information? And so I think that represents what happens with a lot of products, though. It sort of says on the packaging, technically this can be recycled, but it doesn't really inform you about where is it your area, where do you take it back to the shop. And I think that's one of the biggest things, is confusion. And when you look at the packet, there's so many symbols on it that you almost think, yeah, like Jane's mum, I'm just going to chuck this in and hope for the best, because that makes me feel a wee bit better. And hopefully that's the right thing to do, when in reality it's probably not.
I think the waste industry has been poor at engaging with these producers to actually say, look, this is the reality of our system. Our system could do this, this, and this, but it can't magically pull products out of the waste stream and do things with it. And we've actually been quite poor at that engagement, and they've been allowed to sort of keep putting these different products in the market. But that's a big one to try and change. Big one to try and change. So you're obviously a bit busy, you know, with your day job and all these national TV appearances we see you on. How do you get away? How do you relax from the work?
I don't know. I do. I mean, I think ultimately, you know, finding balance is difficult because, you know, especially, you know, you sort of made a joke about the media stuff, but actually it's one of these things that, if you've got journalists every day phoning you up saying, hey, we want to cover this, it's not just about, oh, it'll get me on the TV. You're like, actually, this is a great opportunity to talk about this message and do this. And often, they don't want someone else. They really want you for the piece. And you need to say, if I say no to this, maybe they don't run the piece. Maybe that's an opportunity to get to a different audience. And so I think it's about recognizing seasons. So like seasons of busyness, or just, making sure that when you do take time off, it's absolutely time off. So I had a work trip to the States a couple of weeks ago. So I was doing some lecturing at a university and then decided to kind of take a holiday at the end of that before coming back. And I said to myself, like, that is actually a holiday. I'm not going to do a single piece of work stuff, and the people getting in touch just get an out of office or just get a, I'm really sorry, but I'm away. And, it might mean that you feel like you're missing out, or there might be opportunities you miss, but it's important to have that time away. And to be honest, I think I've got a little dog and he keeps me, I have to take him out, we go on big walks. And I think that is really important to actually get outside and be able to remove myself. But I think, especially over the years and certainly over the last few months with the campaign, it's also important to be reaching out to people that can help with a lot of the different bits. And so, there's some great organizations who are part of this kind of vape campaign in particular. And, instead of me having to sit and work out, how do I do a press release, or how do I round up these people to get a meeting on the go? It's about looking at these organizations and say, right, who's got the skills to do a policy report? Who can do the press release? Who can do the doodle poll to get the meeting organised? And kind of sifting it out a wee bit and saying, great, okay, then we'll all help chip in at the end. But, it's about that. But I think I've always been busy. I've never just done campaigning on its own. I've always done it basically with a full-time job, and I think that works well. But I think certainly finding balance can be hard, especially when, you want to do all of the bits, none of it is onerous. But I think, but it does pay off in the end. And I think that's the important bit. I mean, one of the things that I did as part of the campaign, I don't know if I regret it now, but at the time there was a Friday night and I was really bored. This is how bored I was, that I just decided to sit and email every single councillor in Scotland about vapes. So
you must have been really bored.
I was so bored. So I just decided, I thought, I really want to tell everyone about this, but I want to do it in a meaningful way. And so I decided to go, and some of the websites make it really easy for you to get their email, others absolutely not.
Yeah.
But I basically decided to sit and do it. And for every single local authority or every council, I also made it relevant. I said, here's the issue, but also I've found this local litter picking group that's finding them, or this school seems to have, and I made it, it was amazing. That's how bored I was. And it was amazing because now, I think we've got one more council to discuss it. But up until this point, we've had 31 councils discuss this at meeting, put forward motions. Like, it's been amazing to see that you can actually get every single council in Scotland to discuss something if you put the work in. But one of the things that also happened was I had all these councillors wanting meetings. And when you suddenly have hundreds of councillors wanting an hour of your time, it can be quite a lot. But I think for me, one, I've learned maybe just go through COSLA, that might be quicker. But second, actually, I've been able to have really meaningful conversations with lots of local councillors and been able to help them through the process. And, our councillors, bless them, they've got so much on their plate. They've got so much to think about. And a lot of them were saying, I don't know the first thing about weed recycling or about vapes or about any of this stuff. Can you help me through? And actually, I think I've probably sat down with over 50 councillors for like hour-long conversations. And the majority of them were the ones who either like put forward the motion or seconded the motion. And you just think, I mean, that is a true testament to why you do this kind of work. But maybe going back to the question Jane put, like, is there an end date? I think at one point I will probably put an end date to like having one-to-ones with councillors or something, just to be like, okay, a lot of my time needs to go to something else. But I think you find the balance, but you also, there's so much benefit. Even if you think, I've no idea why, like what benefit's going to come from this conversation, you'd be so surprised that, having a meeting with someone, what might, end up happening from that. And I think that can be really beneficial.
No, absolutely. It's a bit like us doing this podcast, we're putting the time and commitment to this for no real, there is no financial gain, but I think the sort of opportunities and the discussions that we've had from it have been really, really positive, and that's probably more important than the actual financial gain side of it, because I don't think there really is a financial gain to be had. It's just raising awareness. And what's next for you in your day job? So you're actually doing a PhD at the moment?
Yeah, so I've got 3 and a bit years of, well, it's like a funded thing. So when I started, I had 4 years of funding, and so you don't want to go over that because then you're working for free. So I've got 3 years sort of left, and over that time I'll go from a lot of what I've been doing is the sort of literature review, kind of absorbing myself in a lot of what's been going on. But over the next 2-3 years, I'll be, grounding myself in the research, doing lots of interviews, focus groups, finding out lots of stuff on the ground, and hopefully turning that into a thesis at the end. And so that's certainly what I'll be doing for the next 3 years. And that's the sort of day job, and the campaigning stuff will evolve over that, and I've got a really supportive supervision team who love all the stuff that I do around vapes and campaigning. And so, it never feels like, I'm having to juggle them. They really appreciate the work that I do outside of the project, which is amazing.
Wow, you certainly haven't got a lot of time left, have you? When you were saying you were doing the was it the half marathon you did in Edinburgh? I'm thinking, at what point did she train for this? Or was it just taking the dog for a walk and having a wee trot around?
Exactly. God. I mean, yeah, my dog drags me around when I'm running. But I think I'm very, even this weekend, it got to, I think, like 6 o'clock on Saturday, and me and my partner didn't have any plans, and he's like, you've got that look that you're bored, what do you want to do? And I think, I do like, immersing myself in work and going to things, which keeps me motivated. But but I think that's important to carve out that time, and sometimes having something like, whether it's a half marathon or whatever it might be, can actually be helpful, because you're like, okay, I need to get out, because in 8 weeks I'm going to be in Edinburgh, and if I haven't trained, this is going to be awful. So, make sure you get it in, and I think that can be really helpful. But I mean, you guys talk about podcasts. I mean, I think the world of learning and knowledge and news is completely changed. I get so much information from podcasts. From, like, there's lots of news kind of channels that do podcasts on stories, and you deep dive into them, and there's ones like yourself that are really kind of tailored to one industry or one topic, and I love listening to them. And so, when I'm cleaning my house, when I'm out for a run, out for a walk, like, that's also my time to be learning and thinking and absorbing. And so I also find that you can do a lot while you're doing 2 activities at once. So go for a run.
Oh, you're multitasking, Laura. I love the multitasking.
Exactly.
Perfect.
Brilliant. So one, we always ask every guest for a bit of industry jargon or an acronym that either you like or loathe or something. Probably vapes, Laura, no?
Vapes, I know. Oh, I mean, if we're going along the vape line, a thing that I hate is when something is sold as disposable. So vapes are sold as disposable. And what does that mean? What is disposable? Because what we know now is actually they should absolutely not be thrown in the bin, because that's a massive fire risk. They should absolutely not be put in your home recycling bins, because the majority of people don't have electrical recycling available curbside. So by disposable, what they mean is, this needs to go into WE Recycling. That's probably your local recycling centre. And so I think a piece of jargon that I would love for us to crack down on is how things are branded. You cannot brand something as disposable if actually it's quite a complex process to get rid of it. Close second would be what we discussed earlier. Anything branded as compostable just makes my eyes roll because it's probably not when we throw it in the bin. But there's so much jargon. I can imagine you've probably got a wealth of people throwing different things at you.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we're going to give you a magic wand to sort one problem out. What would you like to sort it out on?
Oh, I mean, I think it's got to be the campaign I'm working on now. I can't give you something else. I don't know what I would put in place though, because I'd want it to be not just disposable vapes are banned. I would want to magic wand some really robust electronic waste regulations, like stuff that you can't get around. There's no loopholes, there's no silly little design changes you can make that sort of, put it outside the bracket. So I think that would be my magic wand, would be, really creating a set of electrical waste regulations that are robust and work for everyone, so that we can really limit this fast growing part of the industry.
Yeah, I like that one. I like the the waste electricals. We always had Scott Butler on, and he was sort of the size and scale of problem. But I think it's what you were talking about earlier with the vapes. It's the reality is, if you put a toaster in, it's not all getting recycled. Some of it is getting recycled, but there's other bits in there that are, there's not hope in hell. So I think the sector sort of imagines that 100% of waste goes in for recycle and 100% gets recycled. The reality is it's nowhere close.
I know, and I think we also need to be realistic here. So if Zurich's, estimations are bang on, if 2 million vapes, so over 100 million vapes a year, suddenly start going to recycling facilities, can we even cope with that? Do we even know what to do with that? And so we need to be really realistic and say, and it's funny, Scott has been part of the conversation around disposable vapes. Material Focus obviously don't support a full ban, but I think, I strongly believe in recycling electronics, but I've got the realistic view that some electronics just shouldn't exist. And I think it's really important to kind of keep that in mind, that, the stuff that you get your TV in, or, we've banned it now, but, like polystyrene, the big chunky foamy white polystyrene, technically that can be recycled. It's been proved that it can be recycled, but nobody recycles it because it's so inefficient, and it's just not, it's absolutely ridiculous to even imagine that being set up. And I think the problem is we just aren't doing that with electronics. We're sort of trying to fit a square peg into a round hole and say, oh no, it's an electronic, we can definitely recycle it, it's fine, without really thinking, if we let this slip, what else does this let in? And suddenly we've got loads of disposable electronics on our hands.
So I think we've run out of questions for you, Laura. So from me, it's thank you very much for your time, and best wishes with your campaign, which I do manage to. I think I first spotted you on Twitter not so long ago, actually, and I like to keep tabs on what you're up to on Twitter. So the only problem is some poor man's trying his best to wreck Twitter at the moment. So it's not quite the platform it used to be, but we'll see if it happens there.
Yeah, no, thanks very much for your time, Laura. And 3 years' time, give us a shout.
Yeah, exactly. I'll be emailing everyone saying, right.
Yeah, it's all about networks, Laura. It's all about who you know. It's not about what you know, it's about who you know.
Exactly. No, thank you so much. It's great to come on, and I recognise as an honorary waste industry sort of got my toe in the water person. So thanks for having me on.
Perfect. Thank you.